We move to our next presenter, the Canadian Federation of Students. Representative, please come forward. Please state your name clearly, sir, for the purpose of Hansard. You'll have up to 20 minutes. Any time left after your presentation will be divided for questions. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Joel Duff. I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Federation of Students, representing our 235,000 college and university student members. Now, I guess I'm not here today to appeal to your social conscience. I'm here to tell you what parents and what students are going to be thinking about if we have anything to do with it in the upcoming provincial election. In 1996, the Ontario government withdrew $400 million in annual funding from post-secondary education. Ontario's system of higher education is yet to recover from this cumulative $2.8 billion withdrawal in core operating funding. Our institutions have been making do with less, accommodating more students with fewer dollars, and this funding crisis has caused university and college administrators to push for leverage to increase private funding, both through students and parents, but also through the private sector. As a result, dramatic tuition fee increases now threaten accessibility for many low and middle-income students, creating a crisis that has been compounded by the Ontario government's 1998 decision to deregulate graduate, professional, and post-diploma programs. However, tuition fee increases have not translated into greater financial resources for post-secondary education institutions because government cuts have outstripped added tuition fee revenue. Today, students are contributing close to half of the operating funds of our colleges and universities. That's up from the 21% of institutional operating budgets that we paid in 1991, and it's even above the goal of 35% that was set by this government back in 1999. All of these factors have conspired to create what we believe to be an unparalleled crisis in accessibility and quality at our colleges and universities. There is an enrollment crisis. All of the evidence over the past few years has pointed to the inevitable intersection in fall 2003 of the demographic impact of the baby boom echo, the two graduating classes of the double cohort, and the growing importance of post-secondary education in today's employment market. This intersection has been met by the government's neglect and mismanagement of the situation and has produced the enrollment crisis that is haunting students and families across Ontario. Preliminary figures released by the Ontario University Application Centre show that there's been a 316% increase in the number of applications to universities since 1996. Training Colleges and Universities Minister Diane Cunningham has stated that she requires an additional $50 million, a figure that we believe is unrealistically low, for higher education to accommodate the enrollment challenges facing her. Yet this government has not even made this commitment available. And now Ontario institutions are short as many as 7,000 to 10,000 spaces, and many institutions are increasing entrance requirements as a means of reducing student demand. Instead of heeding the projection of stakeholders, the Ontario government has consistently underestimated the size of the enrollment boom while repeating their mantra that every willing and qualified student will find a place. As it stands, it could well be that 1 out of every 7 qualified students will not find a place at an Ontario college or university. Our solutions to the enrollment crisis are simple. Universities need an additional $200 million immediately, and colleges need an additional $127 million. There's also an access crisis. The impact of increasing tuition fees can no longer be ignored by this government. At an average of $4,634 in 2002-2003, undergraduate arts tuition fees in Ontario are the second highest in the country, and this figure represents an increase of more than 150% since 1996. In fact, tuition fees for some programs have increased by more than 800% since 1998. The tuition fees for law at the University of Toronto are set to increase to $22,000 a year over the next 3 years, and this has resulted in the Black Law Student Association of Canada and the African Canadian Legal Clinic formally filing a complaint with the Ontario Human Rights Commission that tuition fee deregulation is a discriminatory practice because it disproportionately negatively effects on people from marginalized backgrounds. As has been documented to this government before, there is growing evidence that tuition fees are squeezing out middle and lower income students. This is especially true in deregulated programs like medicine, law, and dentistry. But evidence is now emerging that shows that across the board, students from lower and middle income backgrounds are pursuing higher education at a lower rate than their wealthy counterparts, likely half the rate. In fact, in deregulated programs at the University of Toronto, over the past year alone, participation rates among students from family income backgrounds of less than $50,000 have dropped by 11%. Here are our solutions. In Ontario, we recommend that $190 million be allocated to immediately freeze tuition fees as a first step towards restoring access to post-secondary education. The Liberals have committed to it as of today, and the NDP have committed to a reduction. And that you systematically reduce tuition fees with a special emphasis on deregulated programs. There's also a financial aid crisis. During their first term of office, this government changed the definition of independent student so that in order to be independently assessed for student aid, a student must have lived away from home for 5 years rather than 4. This government lowered the family income threshold for student loans and disqualified part-time students from receiving student aid. At that time and consistently thereafter, the Federation warned that these kinds of changes introduced by this government would create a crisis in access to student financial assistance. We take no satisfaction in noting that yet again our predictions were borne out in practice. Last November, internal government documents demonstrated that the Ontario Student Assistance Program has experienced a 40% decline in the number of students accessing the program. This has occurred at a time when post-secondary education has been experiencing the greatest growth in the past 30 years. This does not represent an overall decline in the actual number of needy students, as Cunningham seems so convinced to reiterate. On the contrary, student financial need has never been greater, but dramatic tuition fee increases coupled with unreasonable restrictions on student loan eligibility have conspired to squeeze some of the most needy students right out of the system. Despite this reality, the Ontario government has continued to mismanage Millennium Scholarship dollars that were intended to provide student debt relief and beyond that provided by already established provincial funds. And in Ontario, the Millennium Scholarship allocations have reduced student eligibility for debt reduction, and as a result, the Ontario government has saved more than $65 million. Rather than reinvesting this money in the creation of new financial aid initiatives, the Ontario government has rolled the substantial portion of its savings back into the provincial coffers. As solutions, we argue that students need substantive measures to reduce the amount of student debt. We do not need any more ways to help us cope with larger debt loads. The Canadian Federation of Students recommends that $135 million be invested immediately to improve student aid and to provide upfront needs-based grants to Ontario students. And we reiterate our call for full disclosure on the use of any savings from Millennium Scholarship dollars and that such money be used to establish new programs that directly reduce the unmet financial need of students. There is a quality crisis. Because of deep government cuts, the past 7 years of tuition fee increases have not translated into any improvement in quality. Dwindling faculty numbers and crumbling infrastructure are just two of the symptoms of the quality crisis in our colleges and universities. What limited funds have been made available for infrastructure have come with such conditions that they have not gone towards solving old problems and instead have created many new ones associated with the increasingly market-driven orientation to post-secondary education. In fact, Ontario has the worst professor-student ratio in Canada. The Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations, whom you heard from this week, has estimated that about 15,300 new faculty will be required to meet today's enrollment challenges, while the Ontario Association of Colleges and of Applied Arts and Technology have estimated that between 2000 and 2005, nearly 1/3 of current staff will be eligible to retire. The staff and faculty shortage, combined with the current enrollment expansion, poses a serious threat to the quality of the educational experience offered at Ontario's colleges and universities. 2 years ago, the government's own Investing in Students task force estimated that the costs associated with building maintenance that had been neglected as a result of financial constraints could be as high as $1.2 billion. The fact that buildings have not been adequately maintained means that Ontario students are studying in substandard learning environments. This government's insistence on increasing the private influence and control of public post-secondary education through the Superbuild Fund and through the introduction of private for-profit degree-granting businesses has meant a thorough entrenchment of market-driven values in building, program, and curriculum development at many Ontario colleges and universities. To solve the crisis in quality, Ontario needs to meet the national average for professor-student ratios. That's a fairly modest demand. Our universities and colleges need $450 million and $150 million respectively for deferred maintenance. The Canadian Federation of Students recommends the replacement of public-private partnerships with unrestricted core funding for colleges and universities, and that existing private institutions be integrated back into the public system. Ontario needs to chart a new course for itself. This crisis has touched every aspect of post-secondary education, from the faculty shortage to the lack of student spaces, from crushing student debt to the doubling and tripling of tuition fees, and from decrepit buildings to inadequate library facilities. It is plainly obvious why most families in Ontario now give this government failing grades for its handling of post-secondary education. Chronic government underfunding is at the root of all of these issues, and even if the above demands are met, the system would require an additional $400 million every year to maintain the system at 1996 levels. This basic recommendation underscores all of the other financial recommendations. Recently, Diane Cunningham, Minister of Training Colleges and Universities, attempted to deflect the genuine anger of students and their families that they're feeling by pitting the needs of the healthcare system against the needs of our education system. The Canadian Federation of Students believes that the Ontario government, were the Ontario government to find the political will to change its priorities, there would be plenty of funds available to properly fund both healthcare and education. And for the record, we do not accept that core funding for one must come at the expense of the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duff.